Hello, Anupama. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on this podcast. It's really a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Thank you, Simit.
Personally, I have been, a documentary filmmaker, and we at Simit Bhagat Studios, we use different forms of creative mediums to tell stories, right? In your case, you use a very different form, which is audio as the key form of storytelling. I would love to, know more from you, why like audio as a form of storytelling that you are using.
Yeah. So actually, I started off looking at audio as an audience, listening to audio as an audience, first of all, which means that I wasn't really analyzing it for how effective a medium it is and, how it works. I genuinely enjoyed listening to radio, which
Mhm.
is the genesis of podcasts. And then of course moved on to podcasts, which became quite easily available, and for free, right?
Right.
Via different podcast apps and everything. Gradually, as I started studying this medium, what I realized from hearing from people is that it basically offers a direct connect,
Mhm.
which means by that I mean that if I am driving somewhere or if I am walking somewhere, if I'm, listening to a podcast, it's as if that person is directly talking to me, like a friend or
Right.
like somebody who's telling me a story. And at the same time, I don't need to be sitting in front of the screen, right? So
Right.
that way it is a very personal medium. That is, it talks directly to the person who's listening, who feels like they are, just listening to somebody speak as they're doing their work, somebody who's sitting in the hall room telling them about what's going on. So that way it is a kind of a personal medium. Yeah, and it also leaves a lot for you to remember, right? Because you are not concentrating on any visuals. Yeah.
Right.
So, particularly if you're that kind of a learner and that kind of a person, and also it's a very old medium, right? I mean,
True.
go back to the days when your grandparents told you stories, you
Correct.
know, or when I traveled in trains in Bombay, I would always eavesdrop, and it'd be so funny, to eavesdrop on some conversations that was happening. It was the day of no cell phones and everything. So yeah, it's that way it kind of stays with you.
In fact, I haven't really had the chance, so far to work specifically or use audio as one of the medium, as far as
Mhm.
storytelling is concerned. The closest that I have come to that is when we were doing a video on gender-based violence for a Mumbai-based nonprofit. We used illustrations on top of the voiceover, and it came out. Personally, I mean, I love it. It came out really beautifully well. I mean, that's the closest that I had come, to doing an audio story. But you have been exploring this medium as a journalist and as an audio storyteller. I mean, could you share maybe like some of the projects or stories that you have worked on, and something that really stood out for you?
One thing I found audio very useful in is to tell the stories of people who don't want their identities to be revealed, right?
Hmm.
Like in the case of what you are saying, also, if the person
True.
chose, that they didn't want their identity to be revealed, it's a very protective medium that way, you
Correct.
know. You can even change the tonality of the voice, you know, if needed, if that person feels that no, somebody will recognize my voice. So that way, you're still having the person tell the story or
Absolutely.
quote it, but you can make sure that their identity is not revealed. So that way, it's great, for um, people who have suffered sexual violence or domestic violence. Or I recently did a story of somebody who was HIV positive, you
Hmm.
know, and even the photos I took of her doesn't reveal her face, which I used as a thumbnail.
Hmm.
But yeah, so that gives them a relief, right? So they're willing to talk to you more openly,
Right.
about it. Now, using it as a form of, telling journalistic stories. So I actually found it to be very, very difficult. Not the medium, but I found this whole idea of storytelling actually, right, is actually quite difficult because
Hmm.
it requires some like you really have to be a good person, I mean, I don't know how else to put it, but for somebody to be willing to trust you with their story, right, and tell it
Right.
in a way that is the truth,
Hmm.
Which it also means that you have to be willing to open yourself up to your subject. Because why will somebody who suffered sexual violence, or why would somebody who is maybe Dalit, a drug addict, why will they be wanting to tell you your stories? I mean, everybody knows that, hey, this person is here for, publishing this story,
Hmm.
and okay, fine, I'll just do it. What makes them actually want to like you and tell the story? So that part of it I personally found very difficult, and I had to rethink and rework the way I did my stories previously. Because as a business journalist or as a regular journalist, you call somebody, you get a quote, you write it out, you send it off. It's kind of
Right.
a little matter of fact.
Hmm.
Whereas here, you have to actually be willing to spend time with them, listen to what they have to say, while at the same time engaging them to tell it in a more concise way possible. If
Hmm.
if the subject has a tendency to ramble. But again, how do you say that in a polite way, right? Which
Right.
is not going to hurt that person. So I found the idea of storytelling itself, which requires you to trace, the life story of somebody with
Hmm.
its highs and lows. That was very, very difficult for me. The
Hmm.
audio part of it, not so much. Just the fact that you have to get somebody to trust you and tell you the story. And then, of course, remember that this is supposed to be for 20 minutes or 25 minutes, right?
Right.
So you have to make sure you are talking in a way that allows that person to reveal a lot of things and not say yes and no and things like that, right? So
Correct.
you want them to describe things. So that part of it requires a little bit of practice, and that's
Hmm.
true for anybody who's looking at storytelling. I personally have loved the medium because I love immersive sounds,
Hmm.
So in audio itself, of course, there are different ways of using it, just like in video, you have documentaries, you have fiction, you have short documentaries, you have news, right? So similarly with audio, there are different formats, right? Like what we are doing right now is like a chattercast, what they
Hmm.
say,
Hmm.
just two people talking. I love the medium of going on the ground, recording sounds, and taking people over there, kind of eavesdropping on what was going on there or what I did over there. So
Hmm.
first, of course, is capturing the audio, immersive audio, the way you want, at least for me, as far as my style goes.
Right.
And secondly, be able to write it in a literary way, which engages the audience and makes them kind of feel that they are there and they're listening to a story. One particular story that I'm very fond of is a interview that I did with a non-speaking autistic person,
I
Tarun.
see.
And just because he speaks with a device. So he
Right.
will type it out slowly and he will speak with the device. So that again, I remember making some of my colleagues hear it, and then of course Tarun and his mom and their community heard it, and they found it very interesting, as did I, because I was meeting a non-speaking autistic person for the first time, and to hear from him about how did his mother and father and how did he realize that he could communicate to them, right? I mean, there were lots of these kind of questions that I had in my mind, which he patiently typed out. He also typed out a poetry. I mean, it was very, very, very touching for me, and to
Oh,
also be
yeah.
told that now I don't want to talk to you anymore,
Hmm.
And so which was also included in the audio,
Right.
so that, and more recently, this story that I mentioned earlier with the HIV positive woman who got married. It was so exciting because I had a chance to be part of her marriage. So I had spoken to her over the phone once, and then I met her one day before her marriage, attended the mehendi ceremony, the marriage. So just all the recordings of, the makeup being put, the
Hmm.
songs. Then finally, the bidai happening and her friends telling her, don't cry, Radu Nako, because your makeup will wash off. So these small little things, which reveal natural conversations between people, I find it very exciting and useful in telling a story. Yeah.
Right, right. Yeah, I heard the last one, the HIV story that you just mentioned. I heard like a part of it,
Okay.
like that day when we after we spoke. And
Mhm.
yes, it is really, you feel that you're part of that space.
Yeah, I'm glad you felt that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I heard like one of the series that you did for Selco Foundation. I don't see a lot of organizations in the social development space doing that, doing using audio as a form of communication. By and large, they sort of struggle to put themselves out there, to tell their story using different mediums, using impactful mediums. Do you think that, organizations in the social impact space can use audio as a medium to sort of communicate more effectively? And
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like we had even, before the podcast started, we were talking about this, that it's quite a democratic medium, and it doesn't take, as long as somebody helps you figure out, okay, this is a format you could use, there is a lot of scope for extremely engaging and grassroots level stories to be told. And by that I mean, it can move out of the studios. It
hmm,
doesn't have to be a studio centric production, which is kind of becoming a little, what do I say? It's losing shine, right?
hmm,
So the beauty about our country is the songs, the music, the traffic, the conversations in local language and dialect. I mean, it is simply phenomenal, you know. And I think it allows, say, not for profits to actually create something which is, of course, low cost, firstly. And
hmm,
secondly, also something which they can show their funders if they have people that they have to approach, as a grantee,
hmm,
to actually show them that, look, this is what we are doing, and this is what people on the ground are saying, right? So there is so much of travel and reporting that happens ordinarily also by a lot of these NGOs, that uh, all you need is a smartphone, really,
hmm,
and if you have a good smartphone. So yeah, so using the audio recording app, you can actually, record a few things. You can be pretty minimal about it, because sometimes it can seem overwhelming to have so much audio, and plan and mix a story, which pretty much is like a blog in a sense,
right.
but in its audio form. So yeah, so that way it allows you to document the work that you've done in a story form. Of course, if you feel that you just want it in a studio form, that's also possible. But the other thing is, you can actually connect. Like I said, it's a very personal medium, right?
Hmm,
So you can use it in a variety of ways, which is one, you can use it. I know, for instance, Selco wanted to, or was it some other organization, wanted to use audio as a training medium, for a lot of the people that they work with. Yeah. So that is also a form that you can use some of these podcasts as, they can be educative material that you can use, for
right.
training, for instance. Um, and yeah, so it's actually a low cost medium that can be used for training. You're anyways on the ground, you can use your smartphone to record. These days, you can even mix it on your phone, if it is a very bare minimum kind of a podcast.
Mhm,
But yeah, so it just allows you to reach out to your audience directly, because it is a personal medium. And secondly, you can also use it as a form of brand building. Alternatively, it can be a narrative form of a podcast, which is that you are taking your listener through a success story that is there, or even a failure, because I know that is something that is often spoken about in the development space, that people don't like to talk about their failures, So
true.
having something offbeat which catches people's attention and is kind of honest, I think, is helpful. So yeah, so that way it can be used for training, it can be used for brand building, it can be used to connect with an audience so that they understand the kind of work you do. It can be journalistic. So it has kind of a variety of uses, and you don't necessarily need, particularly if you're going to rural areas, you don't need uh, a lot to play an audio. You
Hmm.
don't need a screen, you don't need this and that. You just, if you have a speaker, Bluetooth, you can, play something aloud for training and things like that. So that way it's fairly mobile and it's quite a nifty low cost medium. Yeah.
Yeah. And from a tools point of view, like if let's say an organization wants to incorporate this and maybe train their staff to record these stories, what are the kind of tools out that are needed, and how does one get started on this?
Yeah, so Newsreel Asia actually does a small training, which is very nominally priced. It doesn't really cost much, and sometimes if the organization can't even afford to pay, I think about the $1,000 that we charge, uh, it's often done even for free.
Hmm.
But like there are things that you have to keep in mind when you record audio, which Simit, you yourself obviously also know as somebody who records audio. So how do you record good quality sound when you're outdoors, and how do you save the data, right? Because you
Hmm.
have to catalog it and keep it ready. So you have to be a little organized about how you record, with space you're recording in. Also, how do you make the person comfortable? Because although audio is easier than video in the sense that somebody is more conscious when the camera is on their face than a mic is at their mouth, but still, you'll have to tell them, to like ignore the mic and like, yeah, we're just chatting. And so you have to make the person comfortable. Otherwise, you'll get a kind of a very strange response, people very
Right.
conscious,
Right.
and things like that. But yeah, you just need a phone. A smartphone is good enough. And of course, if you want to transfer the data and keep it safely, you transfer it to your computer. And then, of course, to mix the audio, you do need some knowledge of a digital audio workstation.
Hmm.
Um, so those things truly, I mean, I am self-taught. A lot of this is available online. You Google anything, you search anything on YouTube, and you have amazing, amazing young people teaching you to do a lot of these things, the tricks of the trade. So yeah, the world is at your fingertips, really. If you want to do this, you can just get on YouTube and find answers to a lot of these technical questions. What do I buy? Now, beyond a smartphone, if you want to think of getting a better device, then a Zoom H1 is a very nifty device. I think it comes at just about $8,000
Right.
and allows you to record 3 hours of audio.
Hmm.
These days, a smartphone is really good enough. I mean, I have been in cases where my battery ran out and I used my smartphone to record audio and it was perfectly fine.
Right.
So the tools are the smartphone, and then of course, if you want to think about getting a mic and everything, but it's the more you start thinking about the gadgetry,
Hmm.
the less it becomes about the story. So
Correct.
really, you can just work with a smartphone and then first build on, I mean, that's more than enough for you to actually take your first steps into audio, really more than enough for even an organization. People don't notice when the audio quality is good, but they definitely notice when the audio quality is bad,
It's bad.
you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So that's why it helps to keep a few things in mind when you're recording audio, like keep the fan off, close the doors, uh, the distance of the mic from the mouth, and so on and so forth. But it all comes with practice, and what seems like a long list of to dos before you start doing it, then it becomes automatic, just like the way you drive the car.
Hmm.
So it's about just doing more and more, and yeah, doing things, having some small projects that you yourself. And truth be told, there are the audio community globally is
Hmm.
quite an interesting community, and so there are always these little uh, contests. I mean, not that the awards and rewards are huge, but there'll always be these little 3-minute audio contests and, shortcuts. I think there's this program called Shortcuts, which now gets relayed on the BBC. These are 3-minute stories,
Hmm.
on different topics. And yeah, and I mean, there's lots of opportunities to practice. And
Right.
sometimes they even give you feedback on the audio and things like that. So it's great fun. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, like as far as sound is concerned, as they say, sound, the best sound design is when you don't know that there is, I mean, when you don't feel that there is sound design, and
Yeah,
that's the best sort of sound design.
you hit the nail on the head, really.
Yeah, yeah. So typically, when organizations in the social space, when they have to look at these kind of stories or explore this as a medium, like one of the things that, or one of the words that often comes up is the impact of things, right? uh,
Mm.
because obviously there are like limited resources, and organizations have to be really mindful as to what they are investing or using those resources for, right? So in this case, like when it comes to audio storytelling, like how do you look at impact? Like how do you look at the impact of, let's say, a particular project, like, and how do you measure that?
Mm. Mm. So, in terms of impact, it's actually fairly easy to measure, because all these podcast hosting platforms, they provide you with the analytics, you know. They tell you how many downloads have happened, how many people have heard it, and so on and so forth. So it's, I mean, measuring these kind of things has become fairly easy these days, because the podcast service providers themselves give you all that data, just like a YouTube would provide it to you.
Hmm.
So you can definitely measure the impact of it. Now, the question is, um, how do you actually tell people that you're out there, that your audio story is out there, right? And how can you actively take measures for listenership, right? One of the things that, like even with Newsreel, which is the organization I'm part of, our stories are not, like day-to-day stories, like breaking news stories, right? So they have a longer shelf life, in the sense they are feature stories, it's this storytelling narrative involved. So as a former teacher, I actually find these kind of stories, and audio stories in particular, of great use to academic institutions, you
Hmm.
know, where they can actually use it to educate, young people, and use it part of the curriculum. But another way of ensuring impact is to reach out to audiences, more proactively, and
Hmm.
looking beyond your cohort, right? Like not just thinking of all the people who are part of your ecosystem, but looking beyond it as well, right? Like I was listening to a program on cars, whereas I was not interested in it,
Right.
and Planet Money, maybe the people are thinking that it's a program that economists are going to listen to, but no, it was very interesting even for young people who are beginning to study economics to listen to, right? So, yeah, so I feel that also ensures that your audience remains.
Wow. This has been a fantastic conversation. It's really sort of opened my eyes to a lot of other avenues which probably I hadn't looked at in the past. Yeah, it's been a fun conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Simit. Same here. I mean, I hope I had something valuable to share with your audience. But yeah, I mean, there's also, I just wanted to end by saying there are lots of resources with a podcast called the Third Coast Festival. All these places, that's the fun thing about the audio community, that there is so much information readily available, particularly from, America and Europe, that you can actually go there. You can learn how to, produce a certain podcast. You can learn about how somebody who produced an interesting podcast, how do they think through it, all those interviews. And Third Coast Festival, for somebody who loves audio and wants to take the first few steps. I mean, I would totally recommend those as a learning, yeah, tool.
Absolutely, we'll include that as links, like in the podcast in the description as well.
Great, great.
But it's been fantastic speaking to you, Anupama. Really a pleasure.
Same here, Sumit. Same here.